Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Coach Jim.
And I'm Coach Katie. Are we introducing ourselves with Coach now? That's pretty cool.
I think so. I had this really funny thing when I first started coaching. It's like, I don't want to be called coach because I felt like it's this thing you have to earn. And then after a few years, I was in the co-op one day and one of our Dartmouth track kids yelled over the aisle and said, "Hey, coach." And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll take that now. So, but it is interesting. So it is kind of weird though too, isn't it? But we have to call you Dr. Coach Katie, right? So
I like Coach Katie PhD. That's exactly what it is.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Yes, although I will say the Coach Katie does feel pretty good. And it's funny because on our Dartmouth team, we've increasingly been spending time with them. They've just started the fall term and there's like 8 Katies. Historically, that's been the modal name on the triathlon team. But I'm the only one so far that gets to be Coach Katie. And I will say if we get another Coach Katie, I think I'm just going to quit being a coach altogether because I just can't handle that level of cognitive overload.
Well, now I seem to have dropped the I. We have a number of Kates on the team now. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
That's true. Yes. And almost every single one of those is a Catherine, which just makes everything even more complicated. And it's all spelled exactly the same way. So I don't know. It's a lot, but I'm Coach Katie and this is Coach Jim. And yeah, we're jumping in with coaching and training insights, if that sounds good to you.
Let's go.
Fantastic. Okay, so I have 2 recent and related athlete stories, and this will come out now a couple weeks after all this happened, just based on how our timeline works. But I first wanted to talk about one of my athletes who unfortunately did have a DNF experience at IM 70.3 Jones Beach. And maybe I shouldn't actually say unfortunately, because I think there were such incredible lessons that came out of this experience, but I'd like to kind of share it, and this is all with his permission. So one of my level 3 athletes had a bit of an unexpected DNF at 70.3 Jones Beach recently, and we've been processing parts of it together. So the text that he sent me, and again, I'm sharing this with his permission, he said, "Water sucked, weather sucked, it's miserable out, got partway through the swim, and while it wasn't a full-blown panic attack, I was physically uncomfortable. It's not rare for me, so I went to my place to find my fight and just found nothing. As I hung onto the paddleboard fighting with this decision, I rationalized that I had 2 personal bests this year, a very long season, and nothing to prove. I'm disappointed and sad, but this was a choice, the right one, and I'll come back stronger. Off-season is going to be refreshing, so I can hit Eagleman hard in the spring." And then he later said, "I felt like Forrest Gump when he just decided to stop running." And so there's this, he sent me this pretty funny meme that has Forrest Gump, and he's just saying like, "I'm pretty tired. I think I'll go home now." And then he goes home after kind of running across the entire United States of America. And so I think this is a really valuable story because I've talked about this with Elena before, but I think the more experienced that you are, the more likely that you are to DNF at some point in your career, kind of voluntarily, not because of some medical issue, just because you're putting yourself out there more. And this athlete, it's true, had such an incredible season, like to have a marathon personal best in May, then go to an Ironman in July and take 2 hours off his personal best time there. It's been a really, really long season. And he said, yeah, he'd only DNF'd once before, and that was when he was brand new. It wasn't voluntary. I believe it was more of a medical DNF. And so I would say maybe zooming out, it probably was a little bit of a gamble to think that you get the momentum for 3 incredible A races all the way through the year. But I just wanted to say broadly, I'm really proud of this athlete for making this very brave call rather than just suffering through a race that his heart wasn't in. That is, I think, the worst, to kind of just be fighting with yourself the entire time and trying to find that fight and not actually being there. So just want to validate there's so much bravery in the DNF if it's like a voluntary thing and you realize that's just not something that's serving you that day. It's sort of like some people have this sunk cost fallacy, but again, towing the line is the biggest win. And yeah, I'm even more proud of this athlete than I would have been had he finished this race. I think this was just a huge moment in his athletic career and something that we can all definitely learn from.
Yeah, I read this and I was like, my first response was just big respect for this athlete, just being like, my season's over with, I'm done. And here's the thing is you just don't know, like we've talked about this, like racing and vulnerability and putting yourself in these big situations. Like you're not going to know that your race season is just over until maybe you're just in the race. It's somehow like you have to get in that situation. At that point, it just becomes, hey, that's it, I'm done. And this reminds me of the first year that I did 3 70.3s. And my third one was, it was in Muskoka, Ontario. I'd flown all the way from Alaska. Beautiful course, having a great time there. I was like, oh, this is going to be the crowning achievement of my third 70.3. And I got to mile 9 on the run, and I literally went from running and stopped in my tracks and literally said to myself, just like this Forrest Gump thing, I said, I think I'm done now. And it was so unexpected. It just out of nowhere, I'm done. This season has been so long. It started back in April with Lava Man and rolled through a bunch of races in Alaska, rolled through 2 70.3s, and I was over and I walked the last 4 miles and I literally could not run a single step after that. I was just done. But I never would have known that, before going into the race. So anyway, big respect for this athlete. Congratulations to them. They had a great, incredible, season, and looking forward to seeing what they do next year.
And I think a takeaway too is from a season planning perspective, I think maybe think about truncating your season a little bit more into less than say 7 to 8 months, especially if there's an Ironman mixed in there. I would say a broader takeaway that I've had from a lot of my athletes now is soon after that 6-7 month mark, people get really tired, both mentally and physically. And it's super hard to just keep going and keep that momentum up. And this is true even if you have a mini off season between races. I think still even just the mental buildup of getting ready for your A race, having another race after that is really hard. So we're all sort of thinking about season planning right now. Again, we encourage our athletes to have those conversations with us as coaches. But so many of my athletes now are moving into the off season, some more begrudgingly than others at this time. But I think it's so valuable for kind of recharging your batteries. And that might take longer than you think. And sometimes it's an experience like this that makes you realize oh, wow, really? I am done. I'm ready for that break. And also really respect how this athlete is already excited about next season too. And we're going to do some goal mapping and we're going to talk about what it would look like to go from level 3 to level 4. So I'm really excited for that conversation. So my next insight here is also related. I'm sharing another athlete story. So I'm sure you can see I am very inspired by all of my athletes recently, but the broad theme of this is kind of when to call it quits and when to keep pushing, which is actually what we were just talking about. But I had an athlete who was signed up for the New York City Marathon and had some big and exciting goals related to that race, but unfortunately has been dealing with a lot of just recurring plantar fasciitis. That is one of the most frustrating injuries that we've talked about. And so the last several weeks of training, probably the last 6 weeks or so, have been this really delicate balance of cross training, a bunch of dry needling and PT. We do different gadgets and devices for pain management. We test the waters on a run. It flares up again. We repeat. So it's just been really this push and pull of trying to see whether it's reasonable. And so she's also been really struggling with this decision of whether to actually continue training or not. And so after her most recent long run, she was doing a 14-mile run and she had a significant amount of pain, miles kind of 9 to 14. She sent me a text that said, "It's sore. I think I'm ready to give up. I'm feeling defeated, sad, and mad. And also can see that part of me will be relieved if I give up. Running isn't joy now or good hard. It's bad hard. It's painful. That feels crappy. I just don't think my body could handle running another 12 miles on top of what I just did. Not in terms of fitness, my body parts. And the self-talk is as hard as the injury. Why didn't I do more of X? Why did I even try this? Why aren't I tougher and willing to keep pushing? But I really do think my victory here is the striver voice isn't winning. My inner wisdom keeps saying you don't need to do this to prove anything to anyone. And how nice that now you can focus on something different and maybe that will be more joyful." And so as a coach, I am so much prouder of this athlete actually for ultimately deciding to call it quits and focus on getting better. I think staying on the path or on track is really easy. That's kind of the path of least resistance. But stepping off into something that's unknown, that's more aligned with what your gut is telling you and what your heart is telling you is better and hard. And I know this was such an agonizing decision, but yeah, just super, super, super proud of her. And I feel like I'm learning so much from all of my athletes every day. So want to give her a huge shout out. And I think to take this story and then the story from my other athlete, we've talked a lot about, Jim, kind of leading with your heart rather than your mind. Both of these were heart-driven decisions, and that is so brave, and everyone should do it more. And I think leaning into that and learning how to do it well will probably leave us more confident in any hard decisions that we have to make that sort of transcend both sport and life. We've talked about self-belief. That's a recent episode with Elena. And so flex that muscle. It's really, really hard to do. We all are very good at striving, but sometimes we need to be better at giving ourselves grace. And yeah, just super proud coach moment. And I have some really inspiring athletes.
Dude, this is so cool. As a coach, I think you sort of go into it expecting I'm the one leading the charge all the time. I'm the one teaching people. And then to have the tables turned and have our athletes teaching us and leading with this, like you say, with this heart and with this wisdom. And just sometimes I'm just so struck by how much of an effect it has on me as a person when you see comments like this and wow, I just so proud and it warms my heart. And I want to live up to this example too. I feel like this person is that's amazing. How can I be this good? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we say this all the time. We learn as much from our athletes as we teach them, if not more. And stuff like the training principles is the easy part. but the mindset stuff is so powerful. So yeah, thank you to both of these athletes. All right. So I think that's it for me for coaching and training insights. Jim, what have you been learning recently?
Okay, well, a little story time here. So I was recently traveling and I came back from traveling. I was 7 hours in the car. And you know how you feel just terrible when you've been in a car or a plane. And I was like, oh, I feel terrible. But it was a super nice day and got back early enough. Like, okay, I'm going to go jump on my bike. So the first thing happens here, and I'm using this as an example of using our training principles, if you will. So get out of the car, go for it, grab my bike and start on my bike ride. And the first thing was about setting intentions. So I usually bring my headphones when I go for a solo ride. So I get going on my bike and I realize, oh no, I've forgotten my headphones. So, okay. So instead of being bummed out, because I use this time usually to learn and to listen to a podcast, I said, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to set my mental and physical intention for the ride. And so then that became like the focus rather than listening to the podcast. So again, back to setting intention. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do a workout. I'm going to go ripping up Route 5 and I'm going to get some workout in. And then I realized, okay, wait a minute. As I started doing an inventory, as I started running the first 5 minutes, I was like, I don't feel that good. I feel kind of terrible. And it's like, of course you don't feel that good because you just spent 7 hours in the car. So what do I always tell my athletes? And we say, just do an easy spin after travel. So I said, okay, great. This is going to turn into an easy spin. And then I felt like, okay, that's much more appropriate. And that's what I'd say to an athlete. And then snacks. So at the turnaround, I started to get a little bit hungry because my meal timing and the content of my meals were just a little bit off because again, you're in the car, you're kind of grabbing stuff as you go. We left early that morning. So anyway, I stopped in to our favorite CSA, Studio Circle Farm, and they have a great cookie selection there. And so I bought 2 cookies and just like Special Forces, I says, 1 is none and 2 is 1. So chowed down 2 huge cookies. That was like awesome. And it's like, okay, now I feel amazing. And then also while I was there, I was thinking ahead to recovery for the next workout, which is another one of our principles. And so they make sandwiches. And so like, wait a minute, I can get a sandwich because I knew that right after my ride, I was going to jump in the car and I was going to spend about an hour doing some errands. And I'm like, okay, kind of hungry now, kind of meal timing's off. What if I grab a sandwich, put it in my back pocket, and then I'll eat that in the car and just bridge up? And so I did. And so I brought this sandwich, I ate it on the car ride, my errands, and I felt fantastic. And actually I could have then rolled into like a strength session afterwards, but I didn't because of timing. And again, just thinking ahead to recovery. And then on the way back, I was like, okay, now I'm fueled up a little bit. I feel good. I got 2 cookies in my system. And we've talked about this a lot. It's like thinking fast is a skill and it's not always an effort. So I thought, okay, this would be interesting. So let's make this a little more interesting. So at the turnaround, I looked at my miles per hour and the average, and it was like 18.4. And there had been a little bit of tailwind on the way out. And it's a little bit more downhill on the way out. And I thought, okay, all right, I'm fueled up. I feel fantastic. Let's do a little think fast experiment. So on the way back, I thought maybe I can go, 18.4 average, but I can't go beyond zone 2 heart rate. And it's also a little bit more uphill on the way home. And there's also a slight headwind. So like, okay, I need to pull out some skills here. What am I going to do? So what I just is I focused on just this tight, low position on the bike. I was really emphasizing keeping my head low. I was also reading the terrain, which is like, so I'd see in the slight downhills, I would tuck on the flats. I would think fast and stay low and sort of keep a consistent effort. And then on the uphills, I lifted my watts cap just a little bit to give a little bit more effort. So while it wasn't a workout per se, I was like really mentally and physically engaged, sort of playing this game of speed and effort while keeping it an easy ride. So and it turns out I got to the bottom of the big hill back to town. I looked down on my average speed had increased to 18.5. And I thought that was just like super fun. So sort of just in this little ride that just started off to be like, had one intention, the intention changed, and it's sort of a lot of other things happened, and I realized like you can do a lot within like an hour, 75-minute spin that will just engage you mentally and physically. And anyway, I just thought that was a kind of interesting day, and I got off the bike, I was like, wow, a lot just seemed to have happened on that bike ride.
No, this is great, Jim, and I have 2 takeaways. One of them is that someone's been listening to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Yes, I guess. Exactly.
And number 2 is that I think there's actually a lot to be said here about mindfulness. So often I think we just kind of go through the motions of our workouts, and it's normal to say, hey, like I always do this. I love to put in a podcast, put in music, be thinking about 800 different things that are going on in my life. But sometimes if we can turn inward a little bit and actually bring our full attention to something, even something that's really easy, I think we can end up like having some really exciting, both mental and physical breakthroughs. And I think I'm pretty good at doing this when I have a really hard workout. I'm going to the track, I'm doing 8x400s hard. I need a mental buildup. I need, a lot of prep to do that. But think about maybe even as a challenge of the week, like bringing mindfulness to your easy stuff. And I think you'll find some pretty big breakthroughs like what you might see in a hard workout as well. So super cool. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, great point. And I'll stick on my bike theme here for my second point, which was we were up in Deer Isle, just sort of pedaling around. And I put some flat pedals, just like you have on a cruiser bike on my old gravel bike. And was just kind of cruising around the island, enjoying it, looking at sights. And then I kind of was thinking about like, what are some of my favorite bike rides? And I realized that there's this common theme with some of my favorite bike rides, and that they involved like sneakers and flat pedals. And I was like, okay, why is that? And I think when you put flat pedals on your bike, or even put your flat pedals on your race bike, it's like you get this mentality of, I'm going to go easy, I'm going to explore, I'm going to take in the sights, I'm going to be social, and you're not chasing fitness or workout. So I think just my advice, and this could also be the challenge of the week as well, is like just like put some flat pedals sometimes on your bike and just go ride around like a kid.
I love this. And actually, this reminds me, Jim, I don't know if you remember, but last year, right before Ironman Lake Placid, you, me, and Kevin went out for a little shakeout ride. And you had, I believe, your road bike with flat pedals on it because you were going to be spectating. And Kevin and I had our TT bikes and went out for an activation session where we were kind of hammering. And you were right at the back of the pace line with flat pedals. And it was just this iconic view of like, yeah, he can hang with the two people that are about to go and try and qualify for Kona in this race without flat pedals. So I hope that's up there with your list of fun rides with flat pedals, because it was just so awesome to see.
That was exactly what it was I was thinking about. And actually, even before that, I went to make that big turn, that big left-hand turn on a river road, and one of my flat pedals caught the pavement because I wasn't used to having such a big flat pedal on there. So I almost fell off the bike, and I kind of lost you guys for a minute. But that was certainly one of them as well, too. And actually, we just had a racer. And actually, you know what? It's interesting. Flat pedals are still really fast. And one of our Dartmouth kids forgot their bike shoes and this and that. So they use flat pedals and Crocs, I think. And they actually ran in their Crocs as well, too. So shout out to John. But yeah, nothing wrong with flat pedals just in general. They're super fun. But yeah, Katie, that was one of my favorite ones as well, too. And my last one here is just a sort of comment from one of my runner triathletes. And he said, I was reflecting that about a year ago, I couldn't manage a 6:30 pace for the 2x10 minute run test. And he goes, now I'm maybe 1 or 2 training cycles away from running that for a marathon. And he said, consistency and structured training is cool. And I agree. Consistency and structured training is cool because look at the things that this athlete is doing. It's really fun.
Yeah. And none of that was made in a single workout. That was brick by brick. Every single small brick contributes to that foundation. And I think actually that consistency and structured training piece is a really nice segue into our main content for the day. So we are going to talk all about how to qualify for Kona, how we did it. And we are going to bring on none other than Coach Kevin, who has done this along with me a couple times. So I think with that, we'll take the transition and enjoy our conversation with Coach Kevin.
Okay, welcome, Coach Kevin Prunty. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be here. I feel like I see you guys a lot, but it's really just through Zooms and podcasts. We got to meet up soon.
We got to meet up soon, right? And you're probably pumped like everybody else because it's fall and 2 things are happening right now. One is pumpkin spice latte time and also World Championships time.
Yes. World Championships, even though the weather's a little bit different over there, it is World Championship time right now.
You know, nothing gets you more cranked up than watching folks like that overhead shot of people swimming in Kailua Bay and then like all those fancy bikes rolling down the Queen K. And of course, then those pros make it look so easy running out of the energy lab, running back down to Ali Drive. You guys have both been there. You guys know that it's not as easy as it looks, right?
Now, running up 250 feet in 90-degree weather is actually not that easy outside of the energy labs, but the pros make it look easy, that is for sure.
They sure do. Anyway, so today we want to talk a little bit about Kona, and we know it's like almost every triathlete's dream to compete at the World Championships. And as you probably know, there's 2 World Championships. We have a men's race and a women's race, and they're split now. And one happens in Nice, France, and one happens in Kona, and they just switch every year. So we want to talk today about what does it take to qualify for Kona? Because lots of folks ask us like, how do I get there? And besides just buying a plane ticket, you actually need to qualify at an Ironman. So hopefully today we'll have some answers for you. And our goal is to outline what it takes in the preceding years and months in order to reach Kona. Every athlete's journey is a little bit different, but there are some common themes that we'll touch on today with Coach Katie and Coach Kevin, who are both 2 times World Championship qualifiers. And even if you aren't dreaming of leaving all your bodily fluids on the Big Island, we invite you to stick around. As always, all of our episodes, we discuss broad training principles, tactics, and strategies that apply across all race distances.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this episode. And I think people will find that the principles that you need to achieve something like qualifying for Kona are pretty similar to basically getting ready for any other Ironman. So don't think this is only about a Kona race. This is really about having your very best day, achieving goals, and kind of what it takes to perform at a high level just in Ironman. So hopefully that'll be pretty applicable.
And some of these principles as well, if you take out the sort of the specifics, swim and the bike, thinking about an ultra marathon or like big mountain expedition or something. So there's a lot of stuff in here. So it's a pretty rich episode. So anyway, we wanted to start by sort of giving you folks context for your triathlon journey. We've been talking in episode 47, we talked about how to plan your race calendar. And in that episode, we talked about how we think about levels of triathletes. And so, for example, we think about level 1 triathlete as someone who's new to the sport. You're just learning, dozens of these fundamental new skills. You're building out your aerobic foundation. And really what I'd like to see is when you graduate from level 1, we want to see you'll be able to swim 1,500 yards in open water, sighting every 7 to 9 strokes, bike safely 25 miles on the open road while eating and drinking, and able to run 6 miles in an easy aerobic zone 2 heart rate. So typically level 1 is probably a 2 to 4 year time frame, but that's really the most important level for a triathlete. And we never try to hurry out of this level, as it is the very foundation of your triathlon career and success.
Absolutely. And then if we jump up to level 2, that's where we see a lot of our athletes progressing next. We kind of say that here you're consolidating all your skills from level 1, and then you can sort of race any sprint, Olympic, and even 70.3. A big level up here is kind of the hours of training per week. So here people are being able to commit to, say, 7 to 10 hours a week of training. And if you can nail that, you're sort of unlocking what it might look like at the next level to have the hours to support an Ironman.
And level 3 is you're very familiar with triathlon and are becoming competitive in your age group, or you might be finishing fairly high overall in local triathlons. So you've probably been racing for about 2 to 4 years, and you've developed this sense of racing that we talk a lot about on this podcast. And you probably train somewhere between 9 and 12 hours a week on average for months at a time. And you probably have the ability to train up to about 15 hours per week during big weeks. And level 3 athletes, they're doing sprints, they're doing Olympics, they're doing half Ironmans, and some are even doing Ironman races.
And that brings us to level 4, where you're pretty competitive age grouper, and often you're competing for the top 10 positions in any type of local or even regional triathlons. You want to win your age group at these different triathlons. It can be half Ironmans, it can be Ironmans. You often have, say, 12 to 20 hours a week to train on average for months at a time. So it's a really big time commitment. And during big weeks, you might be training up to 22, 25 hours. And we'll say if you're a level 4 athlete and sometimes even a level 3 athlete, it can be time to start dreaming about going to Kona. And actually here we'll plug episode 49, which is all about setting goals in training and racing. Probably qualifying for Kona is the biggest outcome goal you could see in many Ironmans. A lot of people have that on their minds. So just think about where you're at in this whole levels scheme. And if you're still a level 1 athlete, we'd say wait a little bit before making your outcome goal to qualify for Kona. But if you just keep at it and move through this progression, you absolutely can get there.
Great. Okay, so we have the brain trust sitting here. I want to ask you guys a bunch of questions today regarding Kona. So the first question for you is sort of any general advice to those athletes who are starting to dream about Kona qualifications, and then also when in your triathlon journey did you guys start to think about the World Championships? And we're going to qualify that a little bit here because Kevin's got a very unique story, which we'll go into. But anyway, any general advice at all?
Maybe I'll jump in with this one first. I think my progression may be a little bit more similar to the level scheme that we've talked about. And yes, Kevin does have a pretty unique experience that I do think is actually really valuable. But I started doing triathlon when I came to Dartmouth. So I did my undergrad there, and Dartmouth had a club triathlon team. And I only had experience as a runner, and I wasn't a great runner. I was sort of like an okay cross-country runner and track runner in high school. But I showed up at Dartmouth and I was like, oh, cool. There's this triathlon team. I could do this as some cross training. Maybe I'll make some friends. I had never touched a road bike before. I could not make it 25 yards across the pool with my face in the water. That is something that we've really tried to drill in, is like you can develop these skills over time. But anyway, so I started that probably in the fall of 2014. And it took me about 4 years at Dartmouth to sort of move through that level 1 into level 2 experience of I was learning all the skills. I learned how to swim freestyle. I learned how to ride a road bike. I got on a TT bike eventually. I did a bunch of sprints. I did a bunch of Olympics. I then started doing halves. I went to USAT Nationals. I started kind of getting better and better as I really allocated time to it. And then I think it was the year after I graduated, so 2019, which was about 5 years into my triathlon career, that we started to think about, okay, let's do an Ironman. But I'll say I wasn't actually thinking about Kona when I was planning to do an Ironman. I knew in the back of my mind that that was a cool lifetime goal maybe, but I believe pretty fundamentally that it's hard to go into your first Ironman with the goal of qualifying for Kona. I think it's really important to experience an Ironman and just know what that entails before walking in with that. So I always say first goal for an Ironman needs to be I want to finish. Second goal is I want to run the marathon, so not walk the whole thing or end up in sort of a run, walk, shuffle. And then down the line, if you can run the whole marathon and you can finish, then maybe we could think a little bit more about that Kona qualification. And we might get into this story later, but I actually really wasn't thinking about Kona because I knew that there was a girl in my age group at this particular race in 2019 that was an absolute stud and got the slot every single year. And we'd stalked the age group a little bit. I've told this story once or twice before, and I knew she was racing. So that was another reason why I didn't really think about it. And to make a long story short, she ended up being sick. She dropped out 5 miles into the bike ride, and then I was able to run down a Kona slot. But I didn't start dreaming about it until probably mile 12 to 13 of my Ironman Lake Placid 2019. And then I was very surprised that it happened and had to have this decision about whether I was going to go. But that meant that then when I did later Ironman, so in 2023, I did Ironman Lake Placid again, I was absolutely dreaming of Kona because I sort of knew what it took to get there. I knew it was going to be harder to get there because I'd be in a more competitive age group. But by then I was definitely a level 4 triathlete. And so it was reasonable to kind of go in with that goal.
Coach Kevin, give us a little background on your Kona experience.
Yeah, I might not be the best candidate for this question because when I did like Placid, I honestly didn't know really what Kona was. Like when I first started training, at least, I always knew of like Hawaii. It was on ESPN, growing up and stuff. That was like the one race that was televised back then. But I got to know, I honestly got obsessed with Kona after I got the ticket for it, and then got to know the history of the race and just got obsessed with it that way. So it was kind of like a little backwards, but I didn't know kind of going into Ironman Lake Placid in 2021. Like I watched the documentary of Jan in 2019. So it was like really cool to know that way, but I had no kind of thoughts or indications going into my race in 2021. And luckily at that point, there was a few more slots because of the COVID backlog, so there wasn't just one. I think there was 3 total for my age group. But anyways, going into it, I guess it was a little backwards, but I'd say if it's now more about it and it'd be something I know for 2023. I mean, Lake Placid, it wasn't Kona, it was Nice, but I had definitely had that on my mind. Going into it, I knew I had to be kind of top dog in the age group to get to it. So I was thinking about it, I dreamed about it, and I kind of set the plan for it. So I guess 2023 would be a better story of it. Is I knew I had to be, top 2 in my age group. We set the plan for a gym and then we thought about it, and that's kind of how we brought it to life type situation.
And Kevin, I'd love to actually jump in really fast here because I coached you to your first Ironman in 2021. And it's interesting because, we say, okay, maybe level 1 triathletes shouldn't go in and assume that they're going to qualify for Kona. And I don't think that you were assuming that you were going to qualify for Kona at all. But I will say Kevin had an incredible aerobic foundation from years and years and years of lacrosse and then eventually a lot of lifting. And so it wasn't like we were doing a couch to Ironman type of thing. I think you actually had a lot of skills and you were very coachable and the ability to learn technique. So I think that's where we can get outside of this levels schema maybe if you're someone who can dedicate the time really early. We knew that. You were Mr. Green Box very early on from basically October all the way until the following July when the race was, and you did have the baseline fitness. So This is maybe why it worked out, I think, to have that outcome because you were coming in with the fitness of someone who's probably more level 2, level 3, even though it was just kind of learning the skills.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely not a couch to training situation where, I always did sprints and I was running that whole summer beforehand, basically. So I think it's a similar situation like somebody graduating that did college sports. Like you see a lot of cross country people or swimmers kind of getting into Ironman. I'd say it's maybe similar to that. Even though I didn't do any of those sports, but I have a few athletes that ran cross country in college and high school, and they're kind of starting at like a high level 2, closer to 3 type situation,
And one more thing I'll add on this too is, we were both pretty young when we did our first Ironman. So we were in the, I believe, 18 to 24 age group. And we've talked a lot about how I don't necessarily recommend everyone who's 18, 19, 20, 21 is going off and doing an Ironman, but kind of those late, like 23, 24 age, it is possible to make that work. And I will say it's easier to qualify in that age group than some of the other age groups. And so I would say for us, Kevin, our 2 Ironmans were probably pretty different experiences because the first time around, the competition just isn't as stiff. But then as we leveled up into 25 to 29, the next time around, it is a lot harder to get that slot. So we had to basically level up our skills and be even more competitive athletes in order to get that slot. And if we were to kind of keep racing, that's just going to get more and more stiff competition. So 30 to 34 is one of the most competitive age groups. Even into the 40s can be so competitive.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously it's a very growing sport. So even that 18 to 24 in the last 3 years has kind of made a big jump. But
absolutely,
25 to 29 is definitely competitive. Like the kid who came in first for mine, he was a pro right after me. So it's like the levels are definitely getting higher as this sport is growing.
Yeah, they say it's a rising tide. Like everybody goes up. So you got to be ready for that.
So I think the number one thing about Kona, really, if it's going to be on your dream list, is time, right? Kona is this huge commitment. It's 6 to 9 month commitment. You got to think about 15 to 20 hours a week, probably starting from January 1 on. So you really need to look at your life. Like, does your support network support this level of training? Are my job responsibilities flexible enough to accommodate my training? And really, are you willing to make these lifestyle sacrifices? I think this can't be understated enough. You must have the time, lifestyle, and systems perfectly in place to support training almost like a professional athlete. You'll be living and breathing triathlon for the majority of the year. Did that sound about right with you guys?
Yes. Yeah. Look at our 2023 prep kit. It was 18, 20 hours for weeks on end. But I could not agree more on like the sacrifice and support network part. You really have to be all in on this if this is your goal, and that trickles into a lot of other different facets in your life. Your social life, your spouses or your boyfriend, girlfriend's life as well. Like you got to make sacrifices kind of all around. So your family, stuff like that, as you're older and you have kids and stuff, you have to kind of take a step back and say, can I put my all into this? So what might hinder your training? I was lucky in 2021 and 22. I had a great support system. I was growing my fitness brand. So it was like a huge priority for me. And Kona was like a dream. I made a lot of sacrifice in that prep. I said no a lot. My work at the time, I was in like a junior role. So I had more flexibility and there wasn't a lot of life stressors going on. So it was like training. But if you take other steps back, if you're in a different spot in your life, like sometimes you can't give it that all. So just taking, I think, a large step back and saying, what are the other stressors in my life? What are my responsibilities? Can I give 18 to 20 hours consistently without making problems going on in the real world?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said there, Kevin. Maybe I could talk a little bit about just what my life looked like in the years that I chose to do Ironman Lake Placid and then qualify for Kona. So in 2019, that was the year after I graduated, and I basically had a chill sort of research position in between my undergrad and starting my PhD program. And triathlon was my biggest priority. And it was awesome. I was basically working sort of part-time on research that was important, but relatively low stakes. And so every single day, my first priority was, okay, let's get the workout in. Let's meet up in the pain cave. Let's do our session. Then I'd go and work for a little while. Then I'd go do more workouts. But I was able to lean into this almost professional athlete lifestyle. And that year, too, I was up in Hanover, New Hampshire. We had a whole group of us that were training for this race. So this also became a really big part of my community. And I felt like I wasn't making as many social sacrifices because the social thing to do was go to bed at 8:30 on a Friday so that you can wake up the next morning and ride your bike for 6 hours. That's something that's not always going to be the case for most people. And I was really lucky to have that set up. And then similarly in 2023, I was sort of at the tail end of my PhD program, but not the very last year where things are really busy with writing a dissertation. And so I had this lull where I was, again, able to make training my number one or very at the top priority in terms of hours in the day. But even so, you have to be okay with the fact that you're living kind of like a monk lifestyle we talk about. You need to be consistently going to bed at a reasonable time and setting aside 9 hours to sleep as often as you can. And if you're working during this too, figuring out whether you can do your workouts really early in the morning, how you can handle that with kids and everything. And I think I've realized I can't do this every year. And I'll talk about this later, but in 2019, I sort of surprise qualified for Kona and then was supposed to move to California right after Lake Placid and start my PhD program and have a lot of high life stress, and pretty quickly got injured when I was trying to balance that with continuing this Kona build. So the point is, you need to set aside this time where you really can keep life stress low. And obviously things that are unexpected can happen. But in general, it's so important to just think, okay, is there anything that I foresee on the horizon as being a barrier to me being able to make this a huge priority? And ask yourself too, we've talked about this in the context of goal mapping, like, why now? Is now the right time to pursue this goal? And maybe it's not, maybe it is, but really deep dive on that question.
The monk comparison is pretty good to do. You definitely have to be prepared to kind of like maybe during your recovery week, you get some more time, but like when you're all in, it's a lot of, I'm going home, I'm eating, I'm going to bed, I'm getting up, getting your workout in, going to work. Like it's a lot of sacrifice, but it's worth it, once you hit that big ticket from Kona or Nice.
So time and environment, obviously, they're the big ones. That's the big rock, right? But there's also this other one, this little bit not so obvious one. And I think this one catches a lot of people by surprise. And that's just like cost. Like these races are really expensive. Plus you need to get a lot of gear. Some of that gear can be pretty expensive. You've got gym memberships, you've got travel, you've got hotel. Race entries are incredible. So for both of you guys, like what do you estimate your personal budget was for these races?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be very surprised at these price tags. It's funny, Katie, I don't know if you've had this, but like when you qualify for the World Championships, like coworkers or people that don't really like know much about it, they're like, oh, that's awesome. They're like sending you out there and you're like, no, it's like the opposite. Anyways, it's, Hawaii especially was definitely more expensive. The flights, the food, the lodging. I was very, very fortunate that I had, local companies in my area that loved what I was doing with work and fitness, and they supported my travels for a lot of it. And that helped a lot, like flights and the Airbnbs and stuff. But the entry fees are kind of crazy nowadays. I want to say, I think Nice was like $950, I want to say, maybe even a little bit more. So the entry fees are getting a little out of hand, and they're expensive because they know it's people's dreams. And I don't get me wrong, I know there's cost associated with getting these races going, but I think that's a huge big ticket item. And then Hawaii, once you're there, is very expensive.
Yep. Totally agree with this. I looked into a little bit kind of what I've spent on going to Kona in the past, and you should be prepared that at a very minimum, flights are going to be $500 to $600 times the number of people you're going with. And often like the whole family wants to go because it's a trip to Hawaii and it's so cool. But yeah, like anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for these flight tickets, especially coming from the East Coast. There's hotels and Airbnbs. That's probably going to be a minimum of $300 to $400 per night. And you'll probably want to stay a while so you can sort of acclimate to the heat there. So multiply that by the number of nights. Like Kevin was saying, race registration alone is, I think it's now over $1,000 for that race registration, which is absolutely crazy. And then you start tacking on, like you need a bike bag, and a lot of people get a swim skin because you have a wetsuit, stuff that you wouldn't need in any other circumstance, as well as check bags. Food, as you were saying, is really, really expensive. So it's something that you need to prepare for. And I wouldn't plan on Kona being an every year thing. I mean, maybe if you have the fitness and the disposable income to do that, that's awesome. But I usually think about this as like a once or twice in a lifetime vacation trip. And then ask yourself if this is how you would want to spend money on a once in a lifetime vacation trip. Like maybe you'd rather just go and hang out in like in the beach in Hawaii or do something a little bit different. One other thing I'll share too is that Ironman is, it's a business, and they actually make you swipe your card at the award ceremony for the race registration. So like you go out and they call your name and they make you yell like aloha if you want your ticket. And then literally you walk up, and if you want it, you swipe it right there for the entire race registration fee. So be prepared for that type of thing. It's basically the expenses just hit you immediately the day after you finished at your goal race. And they absolutely are playing on people's hopes and dreams, which I understand from a business perspective. But yeah, long story short, this is absolutely not cheap.
So we hear, okay, so time, environment, cost, and we talked a lot about, in terms of time, we're talking about maybe 15, 20 hours a week. So we kind of wanted to go through here a little bit and say, okay, what does a typical Kona qualifying week look like? And so Let's summarize that. So Monday, we generally like to have a day off. We really need a day off actually because your load is so high. And also that day off probably includes a lot of like meal prep, running errands, and just sort of generally clearing your plate for the rest of the week so you can train for the next 6 days. And then Tuesday, run day, usually possibly a double run day if you're doing a run training block. Double run days are typically our intervals in the morning and then like a recovery zone 2 run in the afternoon, or that could also be a ride as well in the afternoon or a swim as well. Wednesday, this is interesting. This is sort of the crux day of the week for most Kona folks because you know you're going to go big on Saturday and Sunday, but the way the numbers work out, you need one other big day in your week. And typically for folks, this is Wednesday. So this is the surprise one. So on Wednesday, you probably need to allocate about 3 to 4 hours. And that's typically like just another longer bike. It also could include a swim or a strength. But again, Wednesday has to be a day where you've got a lot of flexibility and you can kind of go big on that day. Not as big as maybe Saturday, Sunday, but you got to go big on Wednesday to make the numbers work out. Thursday, again, back to sort of some running workouts, maybe some swimming. Friday, for me, I typically like to include some sort of short tempo bike session and maybe some strength. And that's just a little bit of intensity, keeping some intensity in the Ironman build and also sort of prep you up for Saturday and Sunday, which are the significant training days. And again, Saturday, Sunday, long bike, long run, long bikes looking like 3 to 4 hours as a standard ride, probably January through April. And then we need to increase that to probably about 4 to 6 hours regularly. And the goal really here is to make 100 miles feel like just another day on the bike. You should look at your training peaks and say, I got 100 today, another century, fine. Go out there and sling your leg over your bike and off you go. Because Ironman run speeds are really built upon big bike fitness. And then if it is the long run, it's usually typically 90 minutes, 2 hours are fairly standard. Also probably along with a big swim. And big swims really look like probably like 3,000, 3,500 yards in the winter months, and then increasing to about 4K for the last 3 months in the build period. So how does that line up, guys, with what you guys experienced and how you sort of worked out your weeks?
Time out. I don't remember getting Mondays off, Katie. Do you?
I think we had a tech recovery swim on Mondays, actually, most of the time. But yeah, it sort of depends on where you're at and what makes the most sense. I would say going forward, I've started to really appreciate the value of a full day off. So maybe it's a little bit different how we've done in the past. But yeah, we often had that tech recovery swim for sure.
Which that'd be ideal here, yeah.
Yeah, I think, all that's pretty accurate. I remember Tuesday we would kind of do like an intense run day and kind of replicate that on Thursday, especially in like the January, February zone. Wednesdays were always big. And then by the time April, May hit, we were doing at least 4 hours every Saturday, 6 hours. We did, like I said, 5-6 century rides for that. So you got to really get comfortable being on the bike for that long. And then Sundays, I think we'd always kind of play it by ear. Most of the time, we'd really try and get a good run in. If we were a little banged up, I remember you'd have to kind of tweak and modify as needed, but it was always, at least 14 miles, getting into some of the higher intensity days and into May and June for that.
Absolutely. And I think something else that didn't come up here, but that's such a crux of the whole Ironman build, especially for Kona, is those race sims. So we've talked about them all the time, but week 4, week 8, week 12, and I think even week 16, we've done some type of huge stimulus race sim over the weekend. So that is usually spreading the Ironman distance off into starting out with 3 days, then you spread it into 2 days, then you spread it into about a day and a half. And you're kind of nailing like, what is my plan? What is the nutrition? What is the hydration? Where am I going to fall apart? And then how can I correct for that so it doesn't happen during the race? So those are even bigger weeks. That's where you're maybe in the 22 to 25 hour range. Whereas I would say standardly, you're seeing more 15 to 20 hours during the specific prep phase.
And how would you guys, so you look at your training peaks and you see, 2 workouts, all the time in training peaks, 2 days are just sort of the normal. How do you guys think about ordering those on each day?
Yeah, and I remember in my original podcast, you guys, I kind of touched on this. Reverse planning, I think, is the best thing, especially, if you're working full time and you got to be at the office or working from home at a certain time. A lot of times it's doubles in the mornings or maybe a single in the morning and a nighttime session. So reverse planning, if it was Tuesday night, I would be like, all right, biking and then swimming in the morning. So I have my swim bag ready at the door. I have my bike bag ready. I'm going to go bike, grab my gym bag, go to the gym, have my work clothes ready. So night before or even Sunday, making sure all your meals are ready, everything's ready for the week. So reverse planning is huge. Coordinating workouts, like if you're traveling traveling and you have to get something on Friday, just moving things around. So always kind of keeping your eyes on that 2 weeks of workouts that's uploaded and reverse planning that way as well, not just for logistics, but also for like your workouts in general. And then like we talked about, kind of just sacrificing little things. Like if something's going on Thursday night, but you need that double sessions because you're in that 8-week mark, just planning your week around that as well with some outside factors.
Totally. I would agree with all of this. And I would say, Kevin, our work schedules are quite different. I have a very flexible work schedule where I can kind of work anytime as long as I get the work in, and you have very specific hours when you need to be in the office. So for me, I usually kind of plan the day a little bit more around what I call my big rock and my little rock. And sometimes there's several big rocks and several little rocks. But what that means is like the big rock is your big priority. What's the thing you really, really need to get in that day? So on a Tuesday, that might be like your tempo run session. It's really, really important. And then let's say you also have like an active recovery bike or a tech swim. Those you can do if you're tired. You don't need the same mental focus, I don't think, to nail some like paddles and buoy in the pool. So I'll always do my big rock first because we know kind of motivation can wane over the course of the day. There's some interesting kind of neuroscience on that, just on how your brain kind of approaches big challenges. So always make that big rock the thing that happens first. And realistically, sometimes for me, the big rock was going to need to be something that was actually work related or something that was life related. It's just whatever takes a huge amount of your energy. But just think about arranging those rocks kind of throughout the day. And, some people actually tend to do better, like they feel the most mental clarity or they feel the most dialed in a little bit later in the day. That's fine. If your big rock needs to always happen at noon, that's great. Do it. But I think in our experience, like you've got to become some type of morning warrior. And for you, Kevin, that's getting those workouts in super early. And for me, that's like grinding away at the work I have to do pretty early. And then as soon as it's like 9, 10 a.m., I can hit that workout. So just think about arranging your days. And you can't have like 6 big rocks in the day. It's just not going to happen. So you can usually only have 1 or 2 and you have to figure out what those are. And during an Ironman build, a lot of the time they're going to be workouts.
And most people always save the swim for the second rock. It's always bike rock, usually. Yeah, totally. That's a good point. There's different hours. Like if you have somebody, who's a nurse or a shift worker, a firefighter. I have an athlete who's a firefighter, and just different hours. He stacks things differently just because on his crazy hours. It's kind of just whatever your situation is.
Okay, coaches. So say somebody comes to you, you're working with somebody, they're checking all the above boxes, all the time, the commitment, they've got all the gear, the money, all that stuff. They're really good with scheduling. They're really good with meal prep, all that. So races. Now, obviously, you guys were very experienced at Ironman Lake Placid. That was the race that you chose for many different reasons, but sort of just in your general experience from an athlete perspective and a coaching perspective, because you're coaching many athletes as well now, how do you go about like saying, okay, I want to Kona qualify. What races should I be looking at?
Yeah. So in general, I always err on the side of race a race that approximates the terrain you can train in. And this is my advice for anyone if they want to do their first Ironman or they want to qualify for Kona. I think in general, probably the more competitive or well-known a race is, the harder it'll be to get a slot. But at the same time, sometimes they actually allocate more slots to these bigger races. So I think there's really no magic sauce to just picking what that goal race is, other than that being the race at which you will perform your best. And it's interesting because you don't have to have the fastest time possible, like in an absolute sense, to crush it in an Ironman. I know that, for example, if I raced Ironman Florida, and as long as it wasn't super windy or super hot, I'd probably go faster than if I raced at Ironman Lake Placid. But I think I'd have a better shot at qualifying at Ironman Lake Placid because relative to other people, I'm a pretty good climber. I do well kind of in that Placid-like terrain. And I'm not as good as just putting my head down on a flat course and drilling in aero. So compared to the other people who are maybe optimizing for their strengths, you might see something a little bit different. But if there's a race that's so hard that it's going to be really hard to even just run the marathon, for example, if you're not good at hills, Ironman Lake Placid is not going to be a good choice. So back to our principles of like pick the race that you can prepare for the best, and then hopefully things will fall into place with getting that slot kind of regardless of what the choice is.
Yeah, kind of taking a step back. Also realizing that a lot of people do go to Florida and try and race that flat course to Kona qualify. So I think there's a push and pull of all those. It's like the downhill courses for the Boston Marathon,
Totally. Yeah. And their absolute time does matter. So it makes sense to go race like CIM, for example, if you want to qualify for Boston, because you're going for time, but here you're going for relative performance. And it really like you race who shows up. So I don't know. I'm Placid or die for Kona qualification for sure. I would do it like 10 times again.
That's why in the show notes, they're like, well, it's only been Placid in the 2 worlds. So
yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about logistics, kind of the stuff you can get your hands around and scheduling, all that kind of stuff. But if you've been listening to our podcast, you know that we actually are just a life and psychology podcast. So I wanted to ask you guys, was there any sort of mental prep things that you guys did for being able to maintain, sort of your enthusiasm and your energy and your sanity through 6 to 9 months of training? And also, like, was there any specific mental prep or general prep that you did for race day? Because we all know that Kona is just a really hard course.
I think at least throughout the prep, like, it's easy to lose sight of the main idea. Like, you're going to Hawaii, you're going to Nice to race an Ironman, and it's like the most iconic one. So most people who don't even know Ironman, they know about these races. Like, you have to wear that with a badge of honor, be grateful that you're training for this and honored you were to qualify for it. I guess that's my piece of advice. If you already qualified and maybe you're like a little burned out, wear the badge of honor that you're doing this iconic race. I guess for the 6 to 9 months, trying to qualify for that at another race, again, same thing. Like, nobody is forcing you to do this. You chose to do this. You're able to do this. You're obviously very fit and an organized person. So, like, never lose sight of that and lean on your support system and, try and have fun with it too. When we did those race sims together, I had so much fun, and, using your coaches and your athletes and support system is important.
Yep, totally agree with all of that. I'll add too that kind of in that 6 to 9 month prep, something that I was trying to focus on is really kind of honoring LSS, life stress score, or modifying in the short term when things got tough, because inevitably things will happen. Like, we've talked about this perfect prep, but I don't think the prep was actually perfect for either of us. Things always come up. Little niggles come on, life things come up. Sometimes you just can't hit those workouts for whatever reason. But if you can make small modifications in the short term, that can really help you avoid having to modify like big time in the long term. When shit hits the fan, you don't really want to be scrambling and not sure if you can even show up to race. I've even had situations like that before. But yeah, take note when LSS feels really high and modify a little bit. I think mindset wise too, it's super important to be intentional about process goals. And the Kona goal, it's a big outcome goal, can be in the background, but you can't spend every single day being like, oh my gosh, this is only worth it if I qualify for Kona. You think about like, hey, I have 10 by 300s at half Ironman race pace today. That's a really hard swim workout, and I'm going to focus on that. And I'm going to nail each one of those 300s. I'm going to nail the workout entirely, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. And I'm also going to celebrate the fact that that went really well. And you have to love that day in, day out process so much. Because again, you could get COVID 3 days before the race. You could get a catastrophic mechanical. And if your only goal and purpose is this Kona slot, then it's going to be really, really hard to handle something unexpected like that. So set yourself up to be excited about what the whole process is. And I would say you have to love that process. It's so important. And don't only go into this with that Kona goal, even though that can be like one of many goals that you're pursuing.
And Kevin, I think you mentioned this before. It's like, these world championships, for a lot of people, it's a Super Bowl times 10. I know being in Kona a number of times, just as a coach and as a support person, it is one of the most intimidating places to be, because this is probably the greatest collection of fit people in the world at one time. But some people also approach it as being, just a victory lap and a celebration. So I guess I want to ask you guys, like how did you approach Kona, and why did you approach it that way?
Yeah, I can take this one first. So I have always approached Kona as a really fun celebration victory lap. And I think that has led to me having 2 really fun and actually objectively good days at Kona. I think both times I knew that I couldn't channel the same type of A race energy into 2 different races. I, number one, couldn't do that physically, because after an Ironman, your body is kind of wrecked, and it's really hard to then rebuild and get back to the exact same peak form and feel totally recovered, especially when you have a race that's pretty close. So like July and October. And I think, Kevin, when you did Nice, it was July and September. That's barely any time to recover in between races. So both times. And then again, too, I was also a little bit mentally burned out from focusing on this one A goal and really need to think about Kona as a B race. But as a result, you go in and there's a whole lot less pressure, and you can really just soak in like, how cool is it to be swimming in Kailua Bay with all these really cool people, and then be out there on the Queen K and then finish under the lights. And if you can lean into that, I think it's so incredible. And it's funny because I think I saw a lot of people racing both times who maybe went in with bigger outcome goals, or they wanted to win the age group at Kona. And some of them did, some of them had great days. But I also saw a lot of people who were really upset, like crying on the side of the road on their bike or in the change tent having a breakdown. I don't know if that was happening in the men's tent, but it was definitely happening in the women's tent. And it's tough because, you know, you've spent all this time and money and investment in this whole thing, and to have a bad experience like that is not great. So I don't know. My biggest advice is treat it like a celebration, and that won't even be at the expense of performance, because I've had good days. And I think part of that is because I just really went in with no pressure and had a really great experience.
Yeah. My Kona experience was like a little different because it was my only full Ironman because it was that COVID delay. But it was same thing. It was Kevin versus Kevin, essentially. And I said that for like the 2 months leading up to it. What did I do last year and what am I doing this year? So again, focusing on, you know, your self-improvement and where you are, you know, as a person and an athlete. But for Nice, it was kind of similar. I was like, all right, I only have 4 weeks from my last Ironman, so let's have fun with this. It's another amazing town and experience, which it was. So we, you know, treating it as kind of a victory lap, and again, knocking off a huge checklist of a bucket list, seeing, you know, experiencing such a cool venue and town and people as well.
So much wisdom here. And, you know, for both you guys, this was such a successful project, both the qualifying and the actual race itself, and just love how you guys have approached both of those. But also with, you know, successful projects, there's always stuff you would go, I wish I had known this. I wish I had done this differently. So looking back on all this and all the success and all this approach, and are there things that you guys would do differently the next time, either specifically for this project or for like a similar endurance type big project?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about sort of how I approached Kona differently the first time and the second time that I went, because I have these two Kona race experiences. Kevin, you have Nice and Kona to compare. But I think the first time in 2019, I initially tried to approach Kona like a second A race pretty soon after doing Ironman Lake Placid. And I will say I was so much more wrecked by 2019 Ironman Lake Placid than I was by 2023 Ironman Lake Placid. I think just because I pushed so far beyond my physical capabilities to get that slot that I was a little bit in the hole afterwards. And as I said before, I was kind of moving. I was moving across the country. I was starting a new PhD program. Life was really, really crazy during that time. And so since I went in to this the first time at Kona, I really had no idea what to expect. Like a second A race, I ended up getting back into training way too soon, I think, and I ended up getting injured. And so I had some pretty bad sort of IT band syndrome that was really giving me a lot of knee pain. And I honestly was not sure if I was going to be able to run at all in that race, where I couldn't really run like 3 miles a couple days out. And then I was like, you know what, I still am here. We already have the tickets. Like, let's just do the swim and the bike and start running and see what happens. And I actually ended up having a miracle day where my knee was fine during that one particular run. Maybe it was just I needed to warm it up for 112 miles to make it work. But the difference between that and the second time was the second time around, I basically did a handful of tune-up sessions. I did a couple like long-ish bike rides, maybe 4 or 5 hours. I did a couple of 10 to 12 mile runs, minimal hard or long swimming, and minimal other workouts. And I focused on just having a super chill August and having fun. And I still had a great day at Kona. So all this is to say, I think if your races are close together, like I said before, don't treat them as 2 A races, and know that even if you don't train a lot in between those, you have all of this banked fitness that you're going to be able to finish the race either way. So I think maybe I wish that the first time around I hadn't pushed so hard. I still ended up having a good day, so no major regrets. And the only reason this would be different would be if, as you said, Kevin, like you have a year in between your qualifying race and Kona, then you can certainly treat it as an A race. If you were to race, say, Ironman California or Ironman Arizona and then qualify for a race that's almost a year later, that's fine. But you really need to have like a good 4 to 6 plus months to get actually back to baseline and recovered and then build again, which is important from just a season planning perspective. Think about that and what your Kona goals are if you do want to try to qualify.
Unless you're a pro.
Okay, I always say there's 2 ways to get to Kona. The first way, as we've talked about, is a Kona qualification. But the second way is just to log on to Google Flights and just book yourself a ticket. So that people want to know, are you going back the first way or the second way to Kona?
That's a good question. I think for now, I'd rather go back the second way. So I wouldn't say I have major Kona aspirations again. I think I have a lot of closure with the Ironman distance for now, actually, just in that, you know, I've done 5 Ironmans to this point, and this past year, so not this year, but the year before when I did Ironman in Kona again, I enjoyed the whole process. I learned a lot. I improved a lot. And I crossed that finish line being like, I'm kind of tired. Like, I think I'm kind of done with this. And then this past year, I kind of leaned into trail running and I'd see the summit. And next year, I'm going to do some cool trail stuff. And I've been absolutely loving that. And I think I also, I devote a lot of time in my life to training, but the level of time you need for Ironman is just such a level up. So for me, even now training like 12 to 15 hours a week, that's still a lot. But it leaves so much more time for me to do other stuff that I really care about. I mean, all three of us, we've really built out coaching. So I'm coaching so much more than I used to be. And I have a research position that I'm really excited about. And I want to lean into that. And I want to lean into like my family and my friends and all of that. So I think there's a time and a place for Kona. I think that ship has sailed for at least the next few years for me. And I will never say never. Maybe I'll go back and try to qualify in like the 50 to 54 age group or something down the line. But yeah, for now, I would love to go volunteer. I've thought about that. Going to Kona to volunteer at the race would be so much fun. And that's 100% on my radar, or to coach athletes who are racing. But yeah, I am good. I do not need to do that race again anytime soon, even though it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, similar here. I guess I can firmly say that my flight next month is going there just to hang out and to not race for my honeymoon. So I will be going to Kona and not racing, actually. But now a similar situation. It was the best experience ever. And it was, once in a lifetime to be in that situation. And could I qualify again? If I jump back into it, I hope so. But yeah, I don't have a huge desire for it. It's like a huge bucket list thing, and we were both very fortunate to be able to do it. 10 years down the road, once we jump back into it, maybe we get that itch again. But that's why the endurance world is really cool. You can try different things and knock off these huge races and be really proud of them and jump to a next goal. So again, same thing for me. If I would love to volunteer or kick my feet up on the beach there, maybe just run the Queen K, not for 26.2 miles at 3 p.m.
Yeah, like a nice 8 miles, 7 in the morning. Could be nice.
Yeah, exactly. If you have the opportunity to do it, jump on it. It was an amazing experience for both of them, Nice and Hawaii, but definitely not an every year thing.
Okay, let's try to sum up everything we've learned today. And you guys jump in here. I'll throw some stuff out. But so what I hear is that it's this very gradual, multi-year build-up to handling this level of training. So don't try to jump into this level of training if you're just like a level 1 athlete. I'm also hearing consistency week after week, month after month is key. And you need about 7 to 9 months to build that peak fitness. And when we talk about peak fitness, we really mean like if you're into training peaks and, chronic training load, that's greater than probably 160, which is a lot. And peak fitness sort of on a granular level looks like 4,000 yard swim feels easy. And as we mentioned, 100 miles feels like kind of a standard ride, like no big deal. And that running 90 minutes off a 100-mile bike ride is challenging, but it's realistic. And you're tired, but you have energy in the tank for more. So that's kind of what peak fitness looks like. You also need a very flexible schedule that allows for 2 to 3 hours of exercise per day on average. And we've talked about that's really, really hard to do. You need to be a morning warrior, as we talked about here. We need to have money to buy gear and travel on race entries. And those who compete at the top of their age group have decided to live this different, and we've mentioned it, sort of monastic lifestyle. And you need to also be super organized. You have to have forethought and planning across your entire life. And that's super critical. And also the physical training is hard, but the mental game is just as important. Anything else guys want to add on that?
Wow, Jim, you learned a lot from us today.
Yes.
not like you taught that to us in the first place. But yeah, that's exactly right. And one thing that I will add, actually, if you do think you want to try to qualify for Kona, you have to do a really deep dive on your why. So, you can say like, oh, it'd be really cool to go to Kona, but that's not going to carry you through when you're 13 weeks out doing a 3-hour ride on the trainer because it rained and you couldn't get outside and it's dark and everything sucks. You have to love the process. And even more importantly, you have to know that right now, without having qualified for or gone to Kona, you are enough. Because if that's not true, then you won't feel like you're enough once you do it. That's big with these big goals. A lot of people are like, oh, I will be the triathlete I've always wanted to be when I go to Kona, or I'll be the athlete that I think I should be. But you're the athlete that you should be right now. Think about these other reasons and love that process. And I also just wanted to shout out, I have one of my athletes who, she did an Ironman last year and she was kind of hoping to qualify and it didn't work out. And then she did an Ironman this year and she did qualify, but she ultimately decided not to take the slot just because it didn't work out with kind of what's coming up in life. And she had a lot of closure with the distance. And so I'm just super proud of this really, really mature decision. She really leaned into what her why was and what her upcoming goals are, and things are different than they were a year ago. But again, just because you even qualify doesn't mean you need to take the slot. Our friend Jay Schmitty has done that before, gotten the amazing slot, won the age group and be like, yep, I'm good. I don't really need to do this. And I think that's super baller and badass. And so no, you have to tap into your purpose. And if you can do that, you won't be kicking yourself 13 weeks out on the trainer. You got to be able to understand kind of what made you do it in the first place.
Yeah, the why is important. That's what gets you through a lot of those really tough sessions. And what Jim was saying, there's life levers, and basically, can you have your training lever pulled all the way down for this amount of time without your work, your life, your social, all the other levels kind of being, I always look at things that way, like where can you pull the levers in your life right now, and where does that fit into your goals? So take the step back. What can you do? Is this the right time for it? It is. Go for it. Have the heart to do it, and make sure you have a good support system along the way.
And I want to emphasize as well too, like Katie, you mentioned that you are enough. And I, when I first started my triathlon journey, a lot of people haven't heard, they've seen Kona on TV, and it's so cool. And so the first thing they would say is, if you say, oh, I'm a triathlete, or I do triathlon, and they say, oh, have you done an Ironman? That's always the first question. And now at that point, it's like, no, I haven't done an Ironman. And of course, if you say, if you've done an Ironman, then people say, well, have you done Kona? So I want to sort of emphasize what you talked about. It's like, you're enough. Step back. If you're a sprint and Olympic triathlete, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Doing an Ironman or doing Kona doesn't make you a better person or make you special in any such way. It just means that you've sort of arranged your life just to do a big project. But we're all equal here. We're all on our own unique endurance journey. So I want to leave with that, because we've talked a lot about high performance today. But just get out there and do something, right? That's kind of what we're all about here at the Endurance Drive.
100%. Very, very well said. With that, so we have some listener questions that I was thinking we could all sort of popcorn together right now. And this is actually coming back to our episode 50, Ask Me Anything. We said that we got a lot of really good listener questions about training principles. And so we're going to kind of pepper them into the next few episodes. So we will go through these pretty quick. The first one says, carb intake has become straightforward, but can you talk about salt tabs or electrolytes in general on longer rides and runs, threshold for using, how much and how often, and how much water is needed? So in my experience, the fancy way to figure all of this out is with actually sweat testing in a lab, though I have never actually done this before. I don't know if either of you have done any type of sweat testing.
No, I never have.
Yeah. And so if you don't want to go do sweat testing, the alternative method for figuring this out is trial and error in my experience. So do a lot of race sims and start with something like one element in one of your bottles. That's 1,000 milligrams of sodium on hot days, and see if you have GI issues or cramp. And if you do, you probably need a little bit more salt. But you have to put yourself in situations where you're sweating a lot. So maybe that's like a fan off bike session. It's a little bit more low stakes when you're in the winter, and you can just try that out. But I would say see what feels good. And cramping and GI stuff is a good sign that maybe you're not nailing it, and you can either kind of turn the levers up or down on sodium. I think it's quite rare that people are taking in too much sodium in a training and racing context. I mean, I wouldn't put like 4 elements into one of your bottles, but in general, I think a lot of people lose a lot more sodium and other electrolytes than they think. So again, just keep kind of leveling that up if you feel like you're not nailing it.
It is interesting. There's sort of a debate sometimes in sports science, like, oh, you have some sports scientists saying you don't need to supplement at all with sodium. And then I think this is the case where the athletes are leading, and eventually sports science will catch up. And so I think almost every athlete that I know that takes, 1,000 sodium per hour generally tends to feel better. And like you say, Katie, maybe there's things so much as too much sodium. Of course there is, right? But I think if you start in that 1,000 per hour during that hot times a year, you're going to be right where you need to be. And I don't think there's much of a downside to having a little bit too much, but there seems to be definitely a downside for having too little.
Definitely. Next question here is related. How do you combine enough liquid electrolytes and liquid carbs on the bike? Do you mix a Martin drink mix with Element? Getting 60 to 90 grams of carbs with solids is too challenging, so I would like to switch to liquid carbs, but I'm concerned about not getting enough electrolytes. So quick answer for me, my bottles have Scratch Super Fuel, the lemon lime flavor, and the citrus flavor Element put together. So I get a huge hit of 50 to 60 grams of carbs and 1,000 milligrams of sodium in my bottles.
And my quick answer to this is I want to give a fake shout out to our Nature's Bakery sponsor, because I'm still a solid food guy on the bike. But actually what's interesting is that the more and more conversations, particularly this year I've had with athletes, is that I think Martin and Precision Hydration and Scratch have really changed the game in terms of liquid carbs. And so for me personally, I know I'm going to try some more liquid carbs next year, because I really feel like this is the new era of fueling and liquid carbs. And there's some really good products out there, like legit science behind them. So Morton seems to be the one that most of my athletes are using, but I also hear Precision Hydration a lot, and I also hear Scratch Super Fuel a lot as well.
2 more questions. This one says saddle sore tips ? LOL. So this is not an LOL topic. This is super common. And as a coach, I have more conversations than you would think about saddle sores. For me, I would say a lot of preventing saddle sores comes down to the right combination of saddle and bike shorts. So for me, I've learned like I need minimally padded bike shorts when I have a wide nose bike saddle, like on my TT bike, and more padding for a narrow saddle. Again, this is all going to be very different advice for like men versus women. There's a lot of different nuances there. But I would say also use a lot of chamois cream and take bike shorts off as soon as you can and shower immediately after riding. You don't want to just like be sitting around in your bike shorts for hours and hours. Also, we had a listener way back when Elena and I did our female athlete series who recommended something called HipoCleanse surgical scrub to your shower routine, which can really eliminate all saddle sores. I haven't tried it, but this sounds like something to try if this is something that you really struggle with.
Kevin, saddle sores, any advice?
Yeah, just don't cry. Like when I first started doing triathlon, I was like, what are these? These freaking hurt. Like I was like, years for some of these things. They're so bad. But there's some TMIs here, but for guys, like try to buzz and don't shake down there. Sometimes that helps. And same thing, getting your bike shorts off right away. You know, washing them, have 2 pairs so you can actually not wear a dirty pair. And yeah, sometimes hot water rag will help a little bit, and don't force popping them because they freaking hurt without TMI.
Yeah, shout out for the 2 pairs that I find that my bike shorts, for whatever reason, I let them air dry and then don't dry in 24 hours. It needs 48 hours to dry. So the 2 pairs of bike shorts are important. I put in a couple links in my answer here, which is a shout out to ISM Saddles, which I really like. High quality bike shorts from ASOS, quality tri-kit from Castelli, the Castella San Remo, and also the same thing, preventative use of chamois cream and ASOS is my favorite, but I've actually used a lot of different chamois creams and they all seem to kind of work the same.
Amazing. I'm glad we addressed that. It hasn't even come up on the podcast yet, but it should be talked about because it's like an issue that everyone deals with from time to time.
It's the one benefit of marathon. Well, one of the benefits you don't have.
No saddle sores? I hope not. If you're getting a saddle sore during a marathon, you're doing something wrong for sure. You need to do a gait analysis. Yeah. Okay, last question. Erg mode versus not erg mode. What are the benefits to each, and how should I be using my winter indoor training sessions to optimize my bike fitness? Well, lucky for you, listener, we did a whole episode on this. Listen to episode 6 way at the beginning. But we've linked an article here for what actually is erg mode. It basically has to do with whether the trainer you're manually changing the resistance or if it's changing automatically on a smart trainer. But I would just direct you to that episode. Jim or Kevin, I don't know if you have anything to add on erg mode.
So this is the funniest thing. So every year I get asked by a couple athletes, should I have erg mode on or off in Zwift? And I always think, I have no idea how you turn erg mode on and off in Zwift. And so I think it's one of these classic overthinking things, because if you load in a custom workout into Zwift, which is what much more athletes do, it puts you in erg mode, and which means it looks at the percentage of FTP and it controls the resistance of the trainer. So it's just automatic. And if you're just doing a free ride, it's also erg mode is off and you free ride and then you shift through things. So I can't even tell you which screen, where it is, erg mode, but somehow my athletes every year find the erg mode button and they write to say, what should I do with this button? And I'm always like, don't think about it. Just open up the Zwift and open up the workout and never look at that. Never go looking for that button.
Good to know. I agree with this on erg mode. Yeah, I don't play around with Zwift functionality too much because I know that I will make a mistake and then I will never achieve my goals of going Ironman. So there you go. Going to Kona. Okay, 2 final segments here. And we do have other listener questions that got sent in with our AMA. So look for those in future episodes. We promise we'll get all of them. Challenge of the week. Mine is all about kind of scheduling. It is the off season for many people. And I would say it's nice to schedule, say, 30 minutes of chill time in your calendar. Because I find that if I don't ever schedule downtime, I look at a hole in my calendar and I'm like, great, let's fill that with something productive. And then often I get really tired by the end of the day. So I've been trying to figure out like, hey, I need a little bit more downtime. Let's actually put it in the calendar so I can make it a priority. And you can do anything during that time. You can sit in your Normatec boots. You can maybe roll out a little bit. You can just lay on the floor. Floor time is great. There's some cool science behind floor time and mental health. So yeah, just schedule 30 minutes of chill time in your calendar sometime next week.
You're saying that Katie Clayton does productive time? Really? Really?
They're my toxic traits. I know. I feel like these podcast listeners know me pretty well right now and all of my toxic traits, but not taking enough chill time is
they're your unique traits. That's what makes who we are. So we're all on a journey, right? So, okay, my challenge of the week is take a fall foliage hike. Foliage is popping from north to south here. Actually, almost regardless of where you are, except maybe from the West Coast, but most East Coast, Midwest people. Foliage is happening. People get out there, walk around in the woods, smell it, look at it. It's so cool.
I'm going to do a challenge of the week. Just check in on two of your teammates, your friends, your athletes, see how they're doing. People have either been training for a while or people have other life stressors. Just shoot them a text. People you haven't talked to in a few weeks, maybe a month or so, just check in, see how they're doing, see if they need any motivation or help in any which way.
I love that. That's such good advice. And I find sometimes like the universe will just align such that when you need that, like I've definitely gotten a text from someone before where I'm like, wow, I really did need to talk to someone. And so be that person. It feels so, so, so good. And maybe they'll just be like, I'm great, nothing to write home about, but there's a good chance that they might need a little friend. So that's awesome. Okay, final segment here, gear pick of the week. I think I've maybe mentioned this product before, but not ever done it as a specific gear pick of the week. So shout out to Alaska. We've had some Alaska references in previous episodes. I am going to recommend the Alaska Bear sleep mask. So this is just like an Amazon, I think it's like $9 or something. It's an easy sleep mask and it's so comfy and I take it everywhere I go and it really helps me, when I'm traveling or just at home. I feel like I sleep better when the light doesn't wake me up. Although now it seems like it's pretty dark in the morning, so maybe less of an issue. But any type of light that's in your room or coming from outside, I just find that it's not too big. It's very kind of light and floaty, and it's a favorite for high quality sleep for me. So highly recommend.
So do you wear the grizzly version or the black bear version? I guess a black bear version because it's smaller, right? So the light fluffy one is definitely a deal.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
How about the feeding and the care? That sounds like a gear week. That's really going to be very complicated for people.
I know. Yeah, black bear all the way. Some people like polar bear, some people like grizzly bear, but I'm into the black bears for sure.
Okay,
New England fried.
Okay. My gear pick of the week is I have recently purchased a waxed bike chain. And I have to say, listeners of this podcast know that I'm obsessive about cleaning and moving my bike chain. And I'm always preaching the reasons why you should. So finally, a recommendation from Jay Smitty. She said, hey, get a waxed bike chain. You'll never go back. And she was correct. I love this thing. They are a little more expensive, but they're super easy to maintain. And your cassette will stay clean. Your chain is clean. The maintenance of it is maybe every 200, 250 miles. You do put some more liquid wax on it. But boy, it's amazing. But again, kind of pricey too.
Jim, how are you going to spend your time if you're not lubing your chain all day long every day? You're going to have so much free time. It's crazy.
I literally now walk out, like my bike is now in my car all the time. And so I don't ever take it out of the car. It just lives in there. I don't know what to do with my time.
Kevin, gear pick of the week.
Yes, it's the Petzl headlamp for all my morning runners out there. It is now dark and we're getting into that time of year. So get the Petzl headlamp. It's great. You can recharge it. You don't have to do replacing batteries and stuff. I charge it every 2 to 3 runs. It's great. Very bright.
I love this. This is also my favorite headlamp. I use it for mountain adventures. I don't run as early as you do, Kevin, but highly recommend that as well. So +1 on Petzl. Okay, well, this has been fun. Jim, thank you for asking us all these questions about Ironman. And Kevin, thank you for being here. And to both of you, we're excited to keep this going next week. But yeah, as always, thank you so much to all of our listeners. And please drop us a rating or review if you haven't yet, especially if you're new. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, peeps.